Hello everybody, welcome back to another Media Reviews with me, your host, Tanner. Today we're going to be talking about the book, Lonesome Dove, written by Larry McMurtry, and also we're going to be discussing the following mini-series with Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones. So this is an excellent set of entertainment mediums, and quite honestly, this is considered one of the best miniseries of all time, and also one of the best adaptations of a book in visual media. So Lonesome Dove was written in 1985 by Larry McMurtry, and this would be the first book in a series called the Lonesome Dove series. But this is actually the third chronological book in a series of 4. About 8 years after this book was written, Larry McMurtry would go on to write Streets of Laredo, which is a direct sequel to this. But then following that, he would write 2 prequels that were obviously at a different time, but featuring most of the same characters, but definitely the main 2, which is Captain Augustus McRae and Captain Woodrow Call. Now this book is a cattle drive from South Texas to northern Montana, and the 2 main characters, as I previously mentioned, are friends from a lifelong career of being Texas Rangers and clearing out from bandits and, Native American tribes that were seen as hostile at the time and stuff like that. And this book gives a really good look at what I perceive to be a realistic Western. McMurtry said that he wrote this book in order to, demythologize the West as Americans see it, because we put so much mythology and greatness into the West. But he wrote this book to say, like, hey, it wasn't actually all that great. There was really bad things that happened, and the West was actually super messed up. But still, when reading this book, I'm just like, wow, like this is a masterpiece of a West. This book is amazing, and really it's probably the first Western I've ever experienced where they talk about horses needing a break. They talk about horses dying and men, being lonesome and everything else. And I feel like a lot of Westerns that we read or we watch don't really have that kind of stuff. I mean, there is really, really dark and terrible things that happen in this book that I've never read ever or seen ever in the history of any book I've ever read, ever. And McMurtry ended up being very, I don't want to say unhappy with this book, but he was kind of disappointed that it didn't do the job that he wanted. He didn't really like it, and he wondered why so many people put such high praise on the book, considering the fact that he wrote it to say, hey, the West was not a good place. But people read this book and go, oh my God, the West was awesome. And to be quite honest with you, while I would not want to live in those times, I can say without a doubt that most of the stuff that happens in this book is really cool, really interesting. And I'm like, damn, Gus and Call were a fantastic duo. But McMurtry doesn't agree with that. And, before he died, he wrote basically that he hated this book. He just thought it was kind of stupid. He criticized it so much. He wrote it as a criticism for the West. But people who read this book, myself included, don't take it that way. And when you watch the miniseries, you're like, wow, it's so good. And put it to all visual perspective, it blows my mind with what they did and how they did it. With that said, McMurtry won a Pulitzer Prize for this for, I think, Best Fiction. It's considered probably his most famous work that did not get turned into a direct movie. And what I mean by that is he wrote stuff such as Terms of Endearment, which got all sorts of Oscar nominations and everything else. And a lot of other stuff he wrote got turned into movies that ended up being box office hits and everything else. And while this did get turned into a miniseries, along with the other 3 in this series, this book is probably his most famous because of this miniseries. This miniseries was made only 4 years after the book was published, and it was an instant success and just boosted this book into legendary status. seemingly overnight. So this book that I have in my hand right now is actually an original copy. It's not a first edition or anything, but it is an original copy from 1985. It is a borrowed book and obviously very well used. Whoever owned this version before me got it for 50 cents. I kind of like used books. Each page has its own kind of story, and it kind of makes me wonder who touched it and who had it and what their experiences were with the book and everything else. Reading this is a part of history almost, because since this book was printed in 1985, which is way before I was born, you know, it's very interesting just to see the original price was $6. So I can imagine this exact book, if it was printed today, it would be upwards of 30, I can imagine. But with that said, let's get into the actual review. So I really loved this book, but there are some caveats with it. First of all, I would probably put this book at an 8.8. Okay, I really liked this book, and I definitely want to read the sequels and prequels eventually, but right now I really don't have a wanting to. There's something that just kind of is stopping me from diving directly into another book by him, and I think it's because of his writing style. And this is my first book by McMurtry, so I can't say this is how every book is, but in conversations of this book, what will often happen is two characters will be talking, and the second character will say something, but then he'll go into a long thought about a memory or something that had happened to him before, a different experience, and it'll be 2 pages about that experience, and then after those 2 pages, the next conversation will be the first guy replying to the second guy. So there was kind of almost flashback scenes in this, but it wasn't real flashbacks. It was almost like looking back at a memory or an experience during a conversation and thinking of how that kind of relates to what's happening now. Also, there was a lot of backstory in this book, which I thought was really awesome, especially since it is the first book in the Lonesome Dove series. There's not really any knowing whether or not McMurtry had a sequel planned and then was gonna write prequels. But with that said, I did like the background and learning about characters. I just didn't understand why he did it the way he did it. It would be in the middle of conversations, or it would mention someone getting on their horse and then talk about like the first time they ever rode a horse. Like, I don't know why I needed to know it in that order, but that's just how it was. So I think that kind of stuff is stopping me from getting immediately into the sequel or prequels. But with that said, this book also had a very slow start. So this book is separated into 3 parts or acts, but it's a very classic, you know, you have your start, you have your upping the pyramid, and then you're down, increase in the climax, and then it kind of coasts from there, right? So this is a very classic plot structure, but like I said, the beginning act is very slow. It's about 242 pages, and it doesn't actually start picking up until probably about page 100. I've read a lot of reviews about this book after I read it, just to see what people were saying. And most of the negative reviews comes from the fact that it's a slow start. If you have a lot of interest in this book, I would just say to keep pushing it until around page 100, and then it starts really picking up. I think Act 2 as a whole is probably my favorite. There's a lot more exciting moments in this, and how it relates to the miniseries. There's just a lot more action and a lot more quick-paced things that happen back to back to back that make you more excited to keep reading. And it turns into a bit of a page turner at certain points where you just want to keep reading, keep reading, keep reading, keep reading. With that said, in Act 2 or Part 2, there's also a lot of the same stuff that happens. So because they're on this cattle drive, they're going through all these different states and all these temperates and all these climates. There's a lot of talks about storms. There's like 10 storms in this book that all have the same exact outcome. Cattle run away. Some of the cowboys get bucked off their horses. They have to find their horses. They have to reherd the cattle and get back to it. That's literally like 10 chapters. Like, I don't need 10 chapters about the same thing that happens over and over and over times 10. So while Act 2 has probably the most action scenes and most brilliant sort of cowboy writing, there's also a lot of boring parts that I just was really hoping to get through very fast. But then Act 3 kind of makes up with it, because there's a lot less talk about cattle drives and a lot more talk about life and adventure and what it means to have lived a full life and treasuring those around you and being part of something that is bigger than yourself. And that's probably where a lot more of the philosophical writing comes in, and it's a lot of drama as well. There's a couple more characters introduced in here that kind of wrap up the whole story and just kind of make it worth reading, really. If Act 3 was cut off and it ended at Act 2, I would probably be happy, but Act 3 wraps it up so well. And the one caveat I have about that is the ending. The actual ending itself is not great. I don't mind it. I actually really liked it because the person that it ends with, in the final scene, I feel like their dialogue in it is so so relevant to who they are as a person that it just makes sense. And I actually really like the ending. Some of the negative reviews that I've read before also kind of talk bad about the ending. Along with the slow start, they say that it's an unsatisfactory ending and that it just kind of ends. And while I do agree with that, I think the end is something that could be seen as bad, but I don't see it that way. And again, I don't know if McMurtry had a sequel planned already when he wrote this book and was like, I'm going to end it this way because the next book starts exactly where it ends. I don't know about any of that, as I haven't read the sequel, but I can say, even if this was a book just by itself, and it was for around 8 years, but if this was a book just by itself, I would say that the ending was fine. It wasn't fantastic. It wasn't, something to be absolutely enamored by, but it was good, and I think it ended well. I can't really say anything else without giving away spoilers, such as some of the chapters that I thought were slow, or some of the things that I didn't like. I can't really say anything without giving spoilers. Act 3 really has a lot of POVs from a lot of different people, but a lot of those people are together in the same area doing the same thing, so it doesn't really change that drastically as much as POVs from pretty much all of Act 1 and the first half of Act 2, where POVs can be from one person over here to one person way over there, and then this person, finally meets up with that person, etc., etc. The meeting of the minds, so to speak, starts happening at the back half of the book. So you kind of have to mentally track where everybody is, what everybody's doing, how long it takes to get where, how long it takes to do this or that, and then kind of put it together yourself before McMurtry starts putting it together for you. So if that's not something you're interested in, then, I don't know if you would really like the first half of this book, but if you're into Westerns even at all, I would so highly encourage this book. It's not even funny. I haven't read many Western books, but I've seen a lot of Western movies, and I can tell you without a doubt that this mini-series is definitely worth it to watch. If you want a very quick version of Lonesome Dove, honestly, just pop this in or watch a streaming service or whatever. You're not going to miss much. Again, I can't give away any differences between the miniseries and the book without there being an absolute metric fuck ton of spoilers, which again, we don't do spoilers here. So I'm not going to talk about any differences. I will say though that 90% of the differences are so minor that in reality, if you took them out of the book, it also wouldn't even matter. I can give one example that has no spoilers. There's only one storm in the miniseries. In the book, there's literally like 10. Like, it's crazy. And they're the same storm over and over. The dust blew into his eyes. Like, dude, I know. I know how a sandstorm works, bro. Like, I get it. Literally, he talks about sandstorms like 6 times in the book. Here, there's only one storm. So you ain't got to worry about that. And it's actually pretty cool because you see some early CGI and everything else. And if you're a film weirdo with that kind of stuff like I am, it's really cool to see, obviously it was made in '89, so it's very pre Marvel CGI, let's say, and it's pretty cool. With that said, there is one major change which, watching this, I can't believe was not in the miniseries. There's a minor character in the book that ends up having a major dealing with the two main characters and another side character who's not in this. It really makes me question why the producers and stuff didn't put that character in this miniseries. I don't know, and I can't say much more without spoiling it, but that's just how it is. I actually saw this miniseries many years ago, and I just read the book for the first time, and then I rewatched the miniseries. So I kind of knew some stuff that was going to happen in here, but had I not known, I would have been way more shocked, way more mad, way more sad. And watching this again, I think it hits all of those emotions that you want to be hit with during times of grief and struggle, but also in times of doing what's right, doing the good things, and just triumphing over something that you never thought you could be able to triumph over. So both of these things together, while McMurtry didn't work directly with the miniseries, they're awesome. This is a really good complement to this. It's a really good adaptation, and it's honestly probably one of the most accurate adaptations, maybe except for like the Hunger Games. Those adaptations of movies were really good. Even things like Harry Potter did not have great adaptations to me, and this is really good. And I understand, due to time constraints and everything else, why they didn't put as much details. Also, since this was made for TV, I can also see why a lot of the details were missed. There's really dark stuff that happens in here, like stuff that actually gave me chills, and like I felt so bad for some of the characters because just terrible, shitty things happen. But McMurtry wrote it to represent how the West really was. He wrote it to be dark and to stop trying to, you know, romanticize the Old West. But on that aspect, he kind of failed, as I mentioned previously, and he didn't really know why people liked this book so much. But after reading it, I can say absolutely why people love it so much is because it's a deep story with some tragedy, but also just shows you how much life means and what it means to be a person on this earth who can do anything that they set their mind to. And this isn't a motivational book. Obviously, it's not any self-help book, but I think those are the lessons you can take from it. If you're looking for some really good quotes about that kind of stuff, look out for everything that Gus says. But also, there's a little bit of a pre-quote in this book by T.K. Whipple, who wrote a book called Study Out the Land. And he wrote, "All America lies at the end of the wilderness road, and our past is not a dead past, but still lives in us. Our forefathers had civilization inside themselves, the wild outside. We live in the civilization they created, but within us, the wilderness still lingers. What they dreamed, we live, and what they lived, we dream." And I think that is such a moving quote, especially for a book like this, which is all about one last giddy up into the unknown. For these two characters who have had such experiences in life and basically grew up in their adulthood together doing, you know, pretty bad and dangerous things, to then finish off their legacy with doing one last heroic and historical thing is absolutely amazing. And I think that if you have any doubts about whether you want to read a Western or an epic such as this, I think you should get rid of those doubts and just pick it up. And I'm sure you can find relatively cheap copies. I don't think they're going to be 50 cents or $6 in today's economy, but you're going to be able to find a good copy for relatively cheap. And like I said, if you don't want to read the whole thing, but you still want all of the hits that the book can give you, you can honestly just watch the miniseries. And the miniseries is really good. I would recommend it to anybody. There's 4 episodes, and each episode is an hour and a half. So that's around 6 hours that you need to dedicate to this versus, you know, 6 months to this, basically. Like I said, it's an 8.8 and I absolutely love this book. Eventually, I will be reading the sequel and prequels. Just right now, I don't think I want to. I think I just want to live with this book. I want to process everything and, you know, be able to talk about it if I can talk about it, which this video is allowing me to do, and just share my love for this book. Again, I haven't read many Westerns, but I've seen a lot of Western movies, and this is honestly probably one of the best Westerns ever. And that's all I have for this media review. Read it, watch it, whichever one, do both. I don't know what you want to do, but whatever you do, I hope you enjoyed this video. That's going to be it for me today. I hope you enjoyed, and peace out.